People sort of think that I grew up a Hollywood kid, and we were not Hollywood kids. We had nothing to do with Hollywood. We were anathema in Hollywood when we were children.
I'm sitting in a garden in California with Mitzi Trumbo. She's thinking back to the early 1950s.
It was the three of us, and there was a caretaker on the ranch. And friends would come and visit, which was really nice, but it was kind of just us.
Mitzi lived with her sister, her brother, and her mom on the ranch. Her dad, Dalton Trumbo, was not home.
My brother, who was 10, and I, when I was 5, with my mom, we went on a train. We're in the club car, I guess it was called, and we're a nice-looking family, dressed well, cute children. My mother was very beautiful. We're there in the club car playing poker, and we attracted some attention, apparently, and someone came over and said to me, "Where are you going, little girl?" And I said, and I guess I had a shrill little voice then, I apparently said, "I'm going to visit my daddy, and he's in jail." So my mom said, the car got quiet, everything was just, so it was like that. I guess I learned better as I got older.
For almost a year, Mitzi's dad was in jail.
He was in prison in Kentucky, in Ashland, Kentucky. You know, we spent an hour with him in the visiting area, which was just strange to me. It's very upsetting to my brother. And then we took the train home.
The one time?
One time. Well, it was only 10 months, and it was a long way away, and we had no money. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Dalton Trumbo, a writer in Hollywood, had stood up to the U.S. Congress, and now he was in prison. HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, had upended his life and was about to do the same to the lives of many others. From the BBC World Service and CBC Podcasts, this is Hollywood Exiles. I'm Oona Chaplin. Episode 8, The Un-Americans. A cold wind blows through New York City in late November 1947. It's been a little over a month since Hollywood actors, writers, and producers were hauled to the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and asked about communist infiltration of the motion picture industry. And now, the studio bosses find themselves far from the California sunshine once again.
The moguls kind of are waiting for the reviews to come in, and to their distress, they start seeing that the American public is actually very suspicious of the communist infiltration that they've seen exposed by HUAC.
Lobby groups are starting to make noise. One of them is a major veterans organization.
The American Legion is threatening action. They're threatening pickets.
Thomas Doherty is the author of Show Trial.
Bankers in Wall Street are very skittish about lending money to Hollywood, they say, if Hollywood doesn't, in their minds, clean house. So the first few weeks of November, Hollywood is getting word back that audiences are actually hissing some of the films made by some of the Hollywood 10 or by Hollywood leftists like Katharine Hepburn or John Garfield. There are reports coming in from the hinterlands about this.
The motion picture industry has to shut this down. The last thing they need is for audiences to start spending less money at the box office. So the Motion Picture Association, the trade body essentially, calls the heads of all the studios to a meeting.
the Warner Brothers, the Schenck Brothers, Harry and Jack Cohn, Dory Sherry, Sam Goldwyn, really all the so-called big macas of the age meet in a conference room at the Waldorf Hotel in New York.
The man calling this meeting is Eric Johnston, the president of the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA. Johnston was a formidable voice. He fought for the U.S. in Siberia in the First World War, and he'd worked his way up from a vacuum cleaner salesman to be the youngest ever president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. After that, Johnston became the president of the MPAA, and when the HUAC hearings into Hollywood unfolded, he was there to represent the industry. Eric Johnston was staunchly free enterprise and anti-communism. He even considered himself to be a Republican activist. But while he was supportive of the committee's basic premise, he did question its approach.
I have never objected to your investigating Hollywood. I told you that we welcomed it, and we sincerely do. We haven't always welcomed some of the methods that you have adopted.
Johnston is confident and maybe even a little smug in his testimony. At one point, he makes the case that American movies are a force for moral good in the world.
We feel that there is very little, if any, communist propaganda in our pictures. Please bear in mind that we are doing business in a worldwide basis. And when you hurt us, you hurt our pocketbook worldwide, and you hurt the American nation worldwide, too. Because the best conveyor of goodwill between our nation and other nations, in my opinion, is the American motion picture.
More than anything, Johnston wants to keep the government out of the movie business, but he's not completely at odds with HUAC. One of the committee members asks him directly, "What would you do if you found out that one of your employees was a communist?"
I would not employ any proven or admitted communists because they're just a disruptive force. I don't want them around.
He was basically saying, we don't need the government telling us what kinds of movies to make or who to hire, and when it comes to communists, we will clean up our own house. What he wanted was to ban communists from working in Hollywood, to create something that would become known as the Hollywood blacklist. This phrase became commonly used. Several decades on, the word blacklist is now regarded by many around the world as outdated, and it may offend, but we will hear it in some archive from the time and in some interviews. Eric Johnston wanted to instigate this list of artists that producers should avoid working with. And when he calls the moguls together at the Waldorf, he wants them to take the same hard line. This is Larry Sapler, author of The Inquisition in Hollywood.
Eric Johnston and his two main advisors were utterly convinced that nothing short of a blacklist would work.
He wanted a clear demonstration from the movie studios that they wouldn't employ communists, but the studios were reluctant.
Most of the producers didn't want a blacklist. They didn't want to be told who they could hire and who they could not hire.
Eric Johnston had his work cut out. Dalton Trumbo and his 9 colleagues were facing serious legal troubles. They had been charged with being in contempt of Congress, and they were likely to face trial. So they gathered together to start to work on their defense. They set up in a small house on Yucca Street in Hollywood. They had to prepare their legal case, but public relations was an important part of their mission, too.
They created a committee which arranged speaking tours for them, articles for them to write. So they're making a very strong effort to publicize their case.
The committee raised more than $150,000 and did what they could to try and win over the broader public. They even made a film.
These are the Hollywood 10. These 8, and these 2.
Audiences across the United States might not be able to relate to several privileged Hollywood artists, but Trumbo was convinced that after the committee had destroyed his career, they would come after the average American. There were plenty of shop floor workers across the country who were in unions that had some association with the Communist Party. So Trumbo's main theme became, we're first, you're next.
Where were you from?
I was born in Spain, in Madrid.
You were born in Madrid?
Yeah, I was born in Madrid. My mother was living there after she did a film there and brought my father over there.
Yes.
To be a communist in Hollywood in the wake of the congressional hearings of 1947 was dangerous. Norma Barzman was a journalist and writer, and she was also a Hollywood communist.
I don't know.
And I got to meet her in her home in Beverly Hills.
And what was it like as a woman writer?
There were quite a few, but much less than nowadays.
Did you find that it was hard for people to take you seriously?
No, there was no problem with
that's
sex. Good. No. I know you'd expect that they were.
Yeah, I expected.
But
really? There was no problem for women to get hired?
That's
Yes,
Norma's daughter, Suzo.
there was a problem for women to get hired. Yes. What I mean is, they didn't try to have influence on what the women wrote. There was I didn't feel there was any censorship.
I love talking to Norma. When we met, she was 101 years old.
Gee, maybe if I think a lot about all this stuff, I'll begin to remember a little. I had put it all out of my mind.
Right.
So I don't have any memory of anything.
She does remember the time in the months after the HUAC hearings.
Gee, it's getting so repressive. Who wants to, even if they weren't writers, who wants to live in an atmosphere where you're afraid to... There were people leaving.
A few people wanted to get out of Hollywood right away. Others hesitated, seeing what would happen next. In her company, I read from Norma's autobiography.
Like brush fires all around us, the blacklist was raging. Subpoenas were out. The sheriff was watching us, and our phone was tapped.
Pressure was mounting on Norma and her communist friends. And meanwhile, her kids were sick. It must have been an unimaginably stressful time for her.
Yes.
Both Luli and Johnny had high fevers, threw up everything, and had continuous diarrhea.
Oh, that's true.
The nurse and the housekeeper walked out together.
Yeah, they did.
Wow. Mother arrived in a taxi.
And they walked out not because of the sickness. They walked out because they felt we were under fire. Well, maybe they walked out.
Because it was precarious. It was a dangerous time.
The fear had an immediate effect. It made people think twice about who their friends were, who they worked with. And it really stopped creativity in its tracks.
There's a lot of people who care.
But they don't do anything about it.
I think
they're afraid to organize. The people went to jail.
Exactly.
Let's face it.
Yeah.
The Hollywood 10.
Yeah.
So maybe fear keeps a lot of people from being as progressive as they'd like to be.
In November 1947, at the Waldorf Hotel in New York, the meeting of the Motion Picture Association was heating up. Studio bosses were being urged again and again that the only way that they could convince the public of their commitment to anti-communism was to ban communists from working at their studios.
They felt they needed to take that action because the blowback from the American moviegoer was demonstrable.
Thomas Doherty again. The communist problem was one item on a long list of issues that the industry was facing.
The last thing motion picture exhibitors needed in the post-war era, when there's competition from other entertainment sources, notably television is going to kick in, as they know, there are all kinds of threats that Hollywood feels. The global market is at stake, too, because there are many anti-communist countries that, if Hollywood is configured as a hotbed of communism, will not accept Hollywood films, particularly in South America. So this is the situation they felt they had to deal with.
So what could the movie studios do? There were two problems to deal with, and the first was the 10, the Hollywood 10 who had testified before Congress. Larry Supler says that the solution to that was pretty easy.
They basically fired them, they said, for violating the morals clause of their contract, which what they had done was bring the motion picture industry into disrepute by their testimony.
Dalton Trumbo was among those fired for this reason. His behavior in the hearing room in Washington gave the studios the excuse that they needed to let him go.
The witness is excused. Impossible.
I know this is the beginning of a communist concentration camp.
Typical communist tactics. Typical communist tactics.
But that left the studio with a wider issue. The committee had only called a handful of known communists. So what were they going to do about the other communists on their payroll?
The heads of the major studios promise that they will not knowingly hire a communist and that they will fire the Hollywood 10, members of the Hollywood 10.
Eric Johnston, head of the Motion Picture Association of America, issued a press release, and it would become known as the Waldorf Declaration. We asked an actor to read his words.
Members of the Association of Motion Picture Producers deplore the action of the 10 Hollywood men who have been cited for contempt by the House of Representatives. We will forthwith discharge or suspend without compensation those in our employ, and we will not re-employ any of the 10 until such time as he is acquitted or has purged himself of contempt and declares under oath that he is not a communist. We will not knowingly employ a communist or a member of any party or group which advocates the overthrow of the government of the United States by force or any illegal or unconstitutional methods.
The studios promised to not knowingly hire a communist. But the moguls were clear. They had to be clear that this was not a list. Constitutionally, communists had every right to be communists. The right to free association is prioritized in the Bill of Rights. So if the studios had said, we're firing people for being communists, they would have been sued.
If they'd said, yes, we are blacklisting all communists, that would have been a kind of a conspiracy not to hire, which probably would have been actionable. So they never did that. They never went that far. They just said, we are not hiring these people because they violated their morals clause.
So there would be no formal list. But employees could be relieved of their jobs because of the morals clause in their contracts, on the basis that their behavior had brought disrepute to the industry.
And their plan was to do two things. They would create a motion picture industry council, which would be a kind of a publicity organ to deal with all issues around communism in Hollywood. You know, put the best face on it they could, et cetera, and blacklist the 10 and go to the guilds to tell them, look, if you back us in this will be the end of it. There'll be no more people who will be blacklisted. So they wanted to kind of get the backing of their community behind them and kind of assuage the audience and the consumers via the Motion Picture Industry Council.
But that wasn't the end of it. Many more people would be blocked from working in Hollywood because of their political beliefs. And the Waldorf Declaration had an immediate effect.
The immediate effect it has is to put the Hollywood 10 out of business and put everybody else on notice that if you are a communist or have communist suspect background, you're going to have to clear yourself in some demonstrable way.
Dalton Trumbo and his colleagues were out of their jobs. But worse was to come for Trumbo and his associates. As the Hollywood 10 promotional film describes, things played out for them almost exactly as they anticipated.
In the fall of 1947, they were subpoenaed to appear before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, whose chairman was J. Parnell Thomas. They did not behave to Mr. Thomas's satisfaction, and they were declared to be in contempt of Congress. They were tried and declared guilty.
But there was one thing they didn't see coming.
They appealed their cases to the higher courts, and their appeal was denied. All 10 are now in federal prison, serving 1-year sentences.
They had hoped that they could appeal to the Supreme Court, that the liberal justices on the court would back them up. But then, 2 liberal justices died, and the court refused to hear their case. They were going to prison. Dalton Trumbo was sent to Kentucky.
As far as I am concerned, it was a completely just verdict. I had contempt for that Congress, and have had contempt for several since. And on the basis of guilt or innocence, I really could never complain very much.
In that moment, the fate of the Hollywood 10 sent a chill through Hollywood.
After the HUAC hearings
Yeah.
in 1947,
Yeah.
how quickly for you...
This is Glenn, one of our producers, asking Norma Barzman.
Well, no, how quickly did you realise that you...
That we better get out of town.
Yeah.
Oh, right away.
Oh, really?
We owned a house on Sunset Plaza Drive, 1290 Sunset Plaza Drive. And we had 2 children, and one on the way, I think. But we thought, when we saw our friends go to jail, you know, the Hollywood 8, 9, what?
10.
10. Then we thought it would be better to get out of town. And especially because Ben had wonderful offers from England. So it tallied with wanting to get away. But we really wanted to get away when we saw what was happening. Our friends were going to jail. Even when you think you've got it guaranteed that you fought for it, it can still be taken away. You have to keep fighting for it.
Did you feel like your freedom had been taken away when you had to leave? Is that what that felt like?
Yes, we felt something terrible was happening in the United States. And yes, our freedom was taken away, and we left in a hurry.
Norma's family were far from the only ones to leave town. But the Trumbos, for now, didn't have that luxury. Dalton Trumbo's family stayed at home and watched their dad go to jail. Other known communists, or those with communist sympathies, try to keep their heads down. Here's Mitzi Trumbo.
You think people kept quiet because they didn't want trouble?
I think it was terrifying. It was, you were about to lose your career. You could go to jail. The Hollywood 10 didn't know they were going to go to jail when they testified. They appealed, lost, they appealed and lost. And other people looking at this saying, oh my God, is this what, you know, they knew what they were facing. The Hollywood 10, they didn't know what the results would be. They really didn't. They stood strong, but hey, they didn't want to go to jail. And nobody else did either. And then when the producers got together and, you know, decided to create this blacklist and not hire these people who would not answer questions, it became real. The studios, the Academy, the producers, not very courageous.
It wasn't just Dalton Trumbo. 9 others went to prison as well. They were Alva Bessie, Herbert Bieberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, Ring Lardner Jr., John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Samuel Ornitz, and Adrian Scott.
I think it's important to be able to talk about anything.
Yeah.
Without having anything happen to you. Sure. Freedom of expression. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I thought that's what America was all about. I don't know, when I was young, I thought that America stood for liberty of expression of all kinds, you know.
And freedom of association, too.
Yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden, the United States started to feel like a genuinely dangerous place to be for anybody who had different views and different ideas, especially if they dared to express them. The tide had truly turned against them. People like Norma started to leave. People like Dalton Trumbo went to prison. And for what? Soon, the attention would fall once again on my family. Charlie Chaplin's time was running out. Hollywood Exiles is a production of BBC Audio Wales for the BBC World Service and CBC Podcasts. I'm Oona Chaplin. Our producers are Glyn Tansley and Megan Jones. HUAC hearings, recorded by Paramount Newsreels. Music by Phil Channel and sound design by Kathy Robinson and Phil Channel. Our theme is by Nick Thorburn. Executive producer for BBC Audio is Martin Smith. At the BBC World Service, Prabjit Bains is senior producer and John Manel is the podcast commissioning editor. At CBC Podcasts, Jeff Turner is senior producer. Chris Oak is executive producer, and Arif Noorani is the director. Thank you for listening.